Hi, welcome to Back to Heart. I'm your host, Cierra Dae. Today, I have a very special guest with me here today, who is a very dear friend of mine, Miss Ambrosia Owen. She is an art therapist and mental health counselor, which are two things that I think really embody what the podcast is about and the work that I want to be doing here in this world. So, this is a podcast with a focus on how to come into more kindness, compassion, and acceptance for the self, our children, and our people. We learn tools of emotional intelligence, mindfulness, spirituality, and expression to deepen our relationships and heal wounds from generations of disconnect. So thank you, Miss Ambrosia, for coming and joining us here today. I gave you a quick introduction that you're a little art therapist and mental health counselor, but I would love to hear your introduction if you can introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, for having me on the podcast. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm trained in mental health counseling as well as art therapy, and I work with all ages. And a lot of people, they don't know what art therapy is. They've never heard of it. They're like, what does this mean? And so basically, I explain it as the art itself is inherently therapeutic. So I'm bringing art into a space with people to help them explore their own psyche, process through emotions, and learn more about themselves. So it's like traditional talk therapy. But also there's this third element of the art that helps people to express themselves. It does work amazing with kids, and it also can be used with a variety of ages. And so because I have the training in talk therapy and art therapy, I'm able to kind of integrate the two.
I love that. I have like a few questions that have already come up for me, but one thing that I want to know is one, how special I think that art therapy is, like of the modality that you use, because I don't think a lot of people know how useful it can be, and that it can be used as a tool for healing and not just like it's a tool for expression, but it's also a tool for healing and understanding. And one of the reasons that I was really wanted to bring you onto the podcast and talk to you, we had recently gone ice skating and we were in the car just talking about your work with children. And as many of you who know me in the real life world, but maybe also in the virtual world, you know that I work with children and have a big heart for children. So hearing your work with children really inspired me. And I was like, oh, I really need to have her on the podcast so that she could talk about this, because I think what you do is really beneficial to the families that you work with and to the individuals at every level, like with children and with adults. But one thing that you do that I think is unique, but also really helpful for the current reality of our families is going to do in-home sessions with art therapy. Can you run us through what that looks like in a typical art session with children in the home?
Absolutely. So I do both. I have an office setting where I see people there, but then also I travel and I see the families in their unique setting. And that really allows me to get a real sense for what's going on in the home and be there in the environment with the kid, seeing what their daily life is like. And so I have my little traveling tote that I bring. It's got rainbow sparkle sequins. It's very fun and playful. It's got a bunch of toys in it and then just some art supplies. And I basically come in and it's I'm meeting the kid kind of at their level. And so that particular program that I'm working in when I do that, it's 12 sessions. So it's a very brief amount of time that I spend with the kids, but I'm really going in to kind of support the parents and the families in working better with the kids and then helping the kids understand their emotion or process traumas, things like that. And art therapy is a really great way to help them open up, because a lot of kids, if you sit them down in a chair and it's talk to me about your feelings for an hour,
Right.
that's just not realistic. That's not the way that
Divulge
kids
all of your life.
it's not the way the kids work. And
Yeah.
so being able to make it playful and make it creative and fun, but also have it be a place to explore their thoughts, explore their emotions, is a really beautiful thing. And the art really helps kids to open up, one, and then express themselves in a way that if they're not comfortable quite yet talking about, okay, this is my trauma and this is, verbally processing, this is how I feel, this is what I think. Sometimes the art can be a way for them to explore it in metaphor and in play. as like kind of the gateway to learning and developing more insight about themselves.
Yeah, because I mean, in my work with children, a lot of children don't yet have the tools even to verbally express. At least younger children don't have the
Mhm.
tools yet. But even older children that I've worked with, just we don't have the language for it, and so they don't know how to like put those things together and like this is I'm feeling this way because this happened.
Mhm.
Or maybe it's like there's some things of suppression or whatever it may look like. So when you're going into a session with a child, what are some like activities like art activities or art play or therapy that you've
Mhm.
done in like different age groups?
Yeah, so I work with a variety of different ages. I've worked with very young kids, 5-year-olds. I've worked with teens, and it definitely does change depending on their level.
Mhm.
So with a younger one, the younger they are, the more you're going to be working in metaphor and working within the play. And
Mhm.
the older they get, the more that they start to be able to verbalize and kind of understand things from a cognitive framework. So
Mhm.
with like a younger kid, a lot of what I do is helping them externalize things. So let's say that they are having issues with the family. Maybe it's a divorced family or there's kind of conflict in the home. One example would I be like, okay, let's draw your family, but each one of you is like an animal or a creature.
Mhm.
What is each one of you going to be? And we might make a drawing or we might do it in clay. And they're like,
Mm.
well, daddy's this lion because, and then it's like, even if they're not ready to talk about why daddy's the lion, they might be like, the lion is like really angry and like takes
Mm.
up all this space, and they'll like play with it. And then like the mom is this bird that's just kind of like floating away.
Mhm.
And so like so much metaphor that's applicable to the actual child and their family dynamics will be right there in the stories that they create and the metaphors that they use.
Mm.
Another example of an intervention would be like I'll draw like an outline of a body. And let's say that this kid is having a lot of anxiety, but they don't have the connection to how they're experiencing it in their body yet.
Mhm.
We can like draw that on the canvas, like, show me where the emotions are in this
Mhm.
outline of a body. And they're like, red is over here, and over here there's like this squiggly knot in the stomach. And
Mhm.
then it's like kind of talking about like, how do you feel in your body when you're feeling anxious?
Mm.
So those are a couple of examples.
Awesome. I love that you bring that up because I was just talking about that in actually both of the episodes, episode 1 and 2. Episode 1, what is emotional intelligence, and episode 2, what is mindfulness? Because I think an essential key to the emotional experience and understanding it is being able to identify these different parts of our body that goes beyond just like this physical sensation on the
Mhm.
outside. Like how are we feeling it internally so that we can create some kind of association with it like in the mental space and we can put something to whatever that feeling is. So now that like you have these kids, or at least you as the therapist have this
Mhm.
understanding. Take for example, like the metaphor that you used with the clay, with the lions, and the bird of like the mom feeling flighty and the dad feeling like this big, sometimes scary creature.
Mhm.
Now that you have that understanding, how would you apply that in therapy with the children to either help them to process that or to bring it to the parents to help them to understand what those metaphors mean and how to work with that,
Mhm.
if that's something that you do with the
Yeah.
parents?
So it definitely depends on the kid and what their readiness is to take that metaphor and then apply it to themselves.
Mhm.
So with some of them, they're ready to start talking about how this really applies to them. And sometimes you're just in a space where they need to kind of keep it in the metaphor. If they're not able to verbalize and acknowledge, I feel scared of my dad sometimes, like I will open up that opportunity for them to talk about and explore that, but sometimes they might have a resistance around that or not ready to verbalize that. So it's like, okay, let's keep it in the metaphor, daddy lion.
Mhm.
But once they're ready to start really processing how it's about them, then it's kind of like a back and forth between the metaphor and the symbolism in the art. And okay, let's bring it back to you and how you feel and how this applies to you. When it comes to the family, huge part of working with kids is working with the parents and
Yeah.
working with the family dynamic, because it's one thing to help the kiddo out, but if they're still in an environment where something in the environment is causing dysfunction or stressing them out, then there's only so much that I can do.
Right. It's just kind of
Yeah.
recreating the cycles over and over.
Yes, and a lot of times parents are overwhelmed and they are not sure what to do, and they're like, my kid is acting out, I don't understand it, they're
Mm-hmm.
having these behavior issues in school. So I might oscillate between spending one-on-one time with the child,
Mm-hmm.
spending some one-on-one time with the parent, or having sessions where I facilitate them talking to one another.
Mm.
But a lot of what I do as well is, okay, here's some like strategies to help with your kids' behavior. Here's some ways you can try talking to them, things like
Mm-hmm.
that.
That's beautiful. And I'm sure like is very, very helpful for parents. That's one thing that I feel is very, very important in like my work with families is being able to make that connection with the parents and being able to bring it back into connection with their children, because that
Mm-hmm.
is what I talk about in this podcast. Like connection is the key to like everything in our relationships and in our healing journey and with ourselves. So with that in mind, with all of this work that you've done with the family unit and both at the parent level and the child level, do you do work with the parents where then you're doing the one-on-one work where they're dedicating time and therapy to helping themselves and connecting with themselves and then connecting with their children?
So as the child's therapist, I have to be cautious of the roles that I'm playing. And I don't want to create like dual roles for myself
Right.
where I'm then also the parent's therapist, because that can get kind of sticky.
Yeah.
So it's like I am there, but the focus is always on the child and on the family dynamic. But I definitely have encouraged parents, like, I think that with everything that you're going through and the stress and the pressure you're under, like, it would be really helpful for you to seek your own personal therapy. I always
Yeah.
encourage that. And so then if they do, that's only going to help the whole situation. And in some ways, that line can kind of be there, but it's like I am still my therapeutic presence with the parents. So I'm
Hmm.
still offering that space for them to open up and talk, but I'm not there in a role as their personal therapist.
Right. That
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah, having that distinction and like boundary in a way so that
Mhm.
you can hold that space for the child and truly be there and be present for the child. I have question that's a little bit more personal if you're open to it, of me being curious
Yeah.
what drew, because this podcast is about big hearts, we're
Mhm.
coming back to heart. And I met you last year in the summer, I
Mhm.
believe, and we were automatically like very drawn to each other. There was obviously a deep resonance there between each other. And in all of our conversations, I can feel your heart. Like I know how much
Mhm.
love you have to give. And I know this shows up in every aspect of your life, but there's a reason why we're drawn to certain types of work. Um, and therapists usually tend to be very empathetic people, very compassionate people who want to change the world, who want to mend hearts and help the generations beyond. So what drew you in initially to become a therapist or an art therapist?
Mhm. I think that's a great question, and I appreciate
Yeah.
your, recognizing my heart. That's
Mhm.
something I saw in you immediately too, and it's why
Mhm.
we connected, because we could just feel that empathy with each
Yeah.
other. Um, I like in high school was when I was just, kind of trying to figure this out, and I was like, I don't know what I want to do, but I know that whatever I want to do, I want to help people. Like that
Mhm.
was the one thing that I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I have to help people.
Mhm.
And then I had never heard of art therapy. But as soon as I learned what it was, which was in college, I was like, that is the thing. Like I watched this YouTube video of an art therapist and immediately was just like entranced and like this is everything for me, because I had taken a psychology class in college and was of course fascinated by it, because I've always just like deeply wanted to understand people and also really felt people
Mm.
and
Mhm.
felt this connection to them, and like I've always been fascinated by people's minds and trying to understand them. So the psychology part was just a fascination. And then the creative side of me is just personally like art has been very healing for me as well. Like I think back to when I was a kid and I was going through, my own stuff, and without like a healthy outlet, like I didn't have an art therapist to come and talk to me, but I did
Right.
have art, and that was writing, that was drawing, and a lot of my art as a child was rather dark, but
Mm.
that was because it was definitely an outlet. Like in ways that I couldn't express in my daily life. I could get those like more difficult feelings out in like kind of a dark poem, or, you know, these things that like expressed how I was really feeling. So I've always had art as like this passion. So to be able to combine my love of psychology, of art, and then like this fulfills this part of me that just deeply wants to help and deeply cares. So it was kind of like the perfect synastry of all of these things coming together. And I've like never regretted it from the moment that I was like, this is going to be my thing. I knew it was my path. And like all along, I've been like, this is so rewarding.
Yeah. And I don't think everybody has this gift in life where, you know, you find something and it clicks and you're like, oh my God, that's it. This was
Definitely
my
not.
purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've spoken to so many people, especially as of late, of like them just sharing with me like, I want to find my purpose. I want to find my reason. But for you, it sounds like you've had this journey of just knowing and like just being plopped into I mean, obviously you did a lot of work to get there, but you were plopped into this role of something that one really fills you, and two, you're like genuinely like really good at. First of all, your art is amazing.
Thank you.
Your art is so beautiful. I was just watching your Instagram story, or I think it was a story of your newest self-portrait, I think. And I'll send some links to some photos if you have any.
Sure.
But her art is genuinely so beautiful. But then there's also moments of your art that have also been up on your personal Instagram page that I've seen, that you allow yourself to be really messy and just like playful with it, which is another big aspect of expression, because I think a lot of us get stuck in perfectionistic roles.
Yes.
And also, you know, like just like what I was just doing, I was like, oh, your art is so beautiful, it's so pretty. So then sometimes we can get stuck in that place of like, oh, I really need to have beautiful art in order to feel worthy of other people's acceptance or validation, or acknowledgement or whatever. So in working with children and with working with other people in your art, how do you allow that to come through as well, like with imperfection, for people who have a hard time letting loose, essentially?
This is a big thing. I'm so glad you touched on this, because it's present in so many people. And, you know, with like a young child, you'll find that that's not present as much. Usually they're more willing to just like make a mess and explore. But then, you know, you start to get a little bit further along in development, and then there's this self-consciousness and also this perfection. And so I face that a lot in art therapy. And I always do like a disclaimer, like right off the bat: this is not about making beautiful art. This is not about making a masterpiece. I don't care if it's stick figures. I don't care if it's a total like mess. As long as you're like expressing yourself, that's all that matters. And art therapy is, I think, uniquely positioned to be able to help people work through those things, because it triggers that. So somebody comes into art therapy, and no matter their, you know, age, if they're starting to develop some self-consciousness, or they're an adult and they're self-conscious, like there is that factor that is immediately there of like, I want to make something that looks good, and the therapist is there watching me, and like and so the really cool thing about art is, depending on the medium and what you use, you can help to break people out of that. So there's something called the expressive arts continuum. I believe that's the name for it, but essentially
sounds so cool.
Yeah. Yes. And basically it talks about how each different medium connects to kind of a different way of processing. So if somebody comes in and they're doing little detailed, like fine line pencil drawing, and you see that they're like erasing it and then like adding another little line, that comes from a very cognitive space, and they call it a structured material, because there's not much fluidity in a pencil. Versus somebody might come in and they're like pounding the clay and using their hands. It's very tactile and kinesthetic. Or, you know, like paint is actually very fluid and therefore emotional. So depending on where the person's at, you might want to use a different kind of medium to get them into a different emotional or cognitive space. So like with my clients that come in, and I'm like, okay, this kid is an amazing artist, but they're drawing these perfect little pencil drawings. I'm going to slowly start to introduce, I'm going to give you some clay, or, you know, I'm going to use, let's try some paint. And depending on the person, they might be a little bit resistant to it. But for example, watercolor is known to be very evocative of emotions, because it's so fluid. Like even within paint, there's different levels of like structure versus fluidity. Watercolor is just kind of all over the place. And so that can bring people more into that emotional space. And it can also be triggering if they're like, I can't handle this. I need the control. I need the perfection. You know, that's where I start to ease them kind of into these things. But it's always like bringing that presence and that reminder of, this does not have to be a perfect work of art. It's okay to be messy. It's okay to just have a stick figure. I don't care, you know?
Yeah, that's amazing and so interesting. Like that was really, really interesting for me because I'm coming into more of an identity as an artist. I think that we're all artists at heart. But, claiming an identity of an artist, again, we think that we have to be perfect or have some type of modality mastered in order to be recognized as an artist. But I've created ever since I was younger, and what you were just talking about with the different modalities and being in different like spaces in the emotional versus the brain state, or the cognitive state. It reminded me of a time when I was younger when I did like the very structured lines. I loved ink design. It's very structured. I would draw these very thin lines and just draw shapes and then draw lines in the shapes and then make the shape bigger and then just morph it into this giant, huge, really abstract piece of art that was just a giant shape with a bunch of lines in it. And it helped me to feel like more stable and structured at that time in my life, like now reflecting on where I was emotionally in that space where I needed a little bit more structure and I needed a little bit more like grounding and rooting in. So those lines were really helpful. Versus now I'm getting into watercolor for the first time and it has been very triggering.
Yeah.
Because it's so unpredictable. Like it's an element, like it's the water element, and the element of water is it's very fluid and it has a mind of its own. So when you learn how to work with the mind of water or the spirit of water, you learn a deeper understanding of self and learning how to be more flexible with flow. And it's been a very healing experience, and me and my mom have gotten into it, and it's also been a really great bonding experience for us to do together, and to embrace imperfection and the fluidity together. So when you're working with children, I'm thinking of a few children that I've worked with lately who are a little bit older, around like 5 to 6 range, and their experiences with art and expression, because of a lot of the structure in the public school system, there's an attempt to use art as a way of learning, but then it becomes forceful of like, okay, now we have to draw a picture for this art or this homework assignment. You have to draw it in order to be done with it and be completed for it. But there's not a desire, it's not an expression of the child. So there's this resistance to it. And so now there's this disconnect from art and this resistance to art. So how would you like bridge the resistance to art, period, if there's a deep resistance to creation with a child?
So I think the best way to meet resistance is to allow it. Like, you're not going to beat resistance by pushing or forcing. So if somebody's like, I don't want to do this, they're totally resistant to it. It's like, okay, you don't have to. I never force any of that. And I also have these play therapy modalities and different kind of talk therapy. So all of it is all voluntary, and it's all like, the kid may not be in therapy voluntarily. It's obviously their parents bringing them or whatnot, but they get choice and they get agency in that room with me. Whatever and that doesn't mean though that I'm not going to in some ways push them, because there's this balance where sometimes the therapist needs to challenge and needs to push. But it's never going to be in a forceful way of like, you have to do this drawing. Like like whether you're a kid or you're an adult, when you have to do something, it's no longer fun. And you're like, no, I don't want to, So
yeah, I experienced that very deeply. Very resistance to anybody telling me what to do. And so I would do the exact opposite.
Yeah. So I never tell like my clients, like, do this. And a lot of times I will say, like, so here's my idea for this prompt, but if at any point you want to do something different or take it totally different direction, you're welcome. If you want to get a different material out, let me know, so that they can kind of have that empowerment and choice in it.
Yeah, I love that. And I experience that firsthand all the time, with children and them And you can't, I mean, this goes, like you said, like goes for everyone. We can't force anybody to do or be anything that they aren't. And when we come into deeper acceptance of who we are as people and who our children are, that's again a way to make like these deeper connections and these deeper bonds. So, do you have any tips or tricks for parents or families to use to incorporate more art into their lives, into their children's lives, to encourage more expression, both at an individual level or within like the parent-child dynamic, or just with their children?
Honestly, I don't have any particular recommendations. I think it's really just about opening yourself up to it, like getting some art out and doing it. Like,
Yeah.
whatever that may be. Maybe it's just you have some chalks at home and you all go on the sidewalk and do some sidewalk chalk, or, there can be different ways to be creative, but I would definitely suggest that, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy, right? You don't have to go out and buy all these like fancy art materials. It can literally just be whatever you have at home.
Mm-hmm.
And you can even think about like non-traditional art materials, like even like food or dirt and plants
Mm-hmm.
and rocks and trees outside in the yard can be used in a creative way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say the main thing for parents to keep in mind would just be following the kids' lead and allowing there to be space for play. And like you said, space for messiness. I think sometimes parents are understandably so, you want to keep the kid in line, you want to keep them clean, you want to teach them how to use things constructively, and also like opening up a space where it's like it's okay to just play, it's okay to be messy, it's okay to
Mm-hmm.
kind of like let loose a little bit is important.
Yeah, I agree. Like, how would you then support or help to support parents who may be feeling anxiety with that? Because I know with a lot of parents that I've talked to, there's a lot of anxiety and stress in messy play,
Mm-hmm.
messy expression, messy art, both with themselves and especially with children, because they can be far more messier than adults tend to be.
Yeah.
Like what I'm thinking of, which has happened in pretty much every household that I've worked in, even just like mixing Play-Doh colors together is like a huge trigger for a lot of families. A
Uh-huh.
lot of parents, and even I like
Me too,
I
I know.
mix.
Yeah.
But it's like it's so helpful for the children to explore like what happens to the Play-Doh when they mix the colors. Does it make a different color? Seeing like the different like designs that are made, like it looks really
Mm-hmm.
cool when you mix the colors together, but there is that initial resistance. I think mostly just because it's just been passed down to us, because kids have no care in the world to mix the colors,
Mm-hmm.
but over time, from all of the like don't mix them or keep them apart or only use this color at a time, then there becomes that resistance within us. But not just with Play-Doh, it's also with paints, like, don't get it on your skin, only keep it on the paintbrush. Dirt, like don't get it in your hair, whatever, like whatever it may be, because we have just a lot of different associations, I think, with what mess is and what it means. So how would you help a parent, or what advice would you give to anybody listening or watching in how to be with that anxiety and that fear while still allowing space for your child's expression?
Well, first, I just want to start by saying I think it's totally understandable. Like, I could completely understand a parent that's like having some structure or boundaries to the art
Mm-hmm.
making because, like they could explain to the child, like, well, you can mix the Play-Dohs, but if you do, then we won't have different colors anymore. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can mix them once and it might be really fun, but then everything's going to be
Mm-hmm.
probably like one color. And are you okay with having your Play-Doh just be one color? And then
Mm-hmm.
you're still kind of giving the kid choice, but they understand like,
Right.
oh, this is why. I think sometimes, and there's not always the space, and like as a parent, there's things are stressful, lots happening. And so you don't always take the space to like sit down and explain everything. Sometimes I think it can be helpful to
Mm-hmm.
offer the why, not just because I said so, but
Mm-hmm.
with the paints, like, kind of explaining those things.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're talking about with seems like more of like an internal process with the parent. Like if the parent did decide, all right, I really am going to allow, even though usually with art, like we have some boundaries, we have some rules about where to put the paint, where not to make a mess, which I think is totally fair.
Yeah.
If they decide, all right, we are going to have some like just purely messy playtime, but it's very triggering for the parent. I think that's where mindfulness is so helpful, and like why I encourage like everybody to get therapy and do their own self-reflective process, because, you know, as a parent, your kind of unhealed triggers and anxieties and things, if you don't look at it, you might be passing it down to your child in an unintentional way. So maybe that is a case where if like a parent really is so kind of rigid and anxious around these things, to be able to like self-reflect and go, okay, maybe this is because of my own stuff, and maybe I need to get a little bit messy, or like allow myself to play in a way that I haven't, and understand like how that their child is a mirror for themselves, and the things that they might be telling the child not to do, projecting onto the kid, might actually be something that is like a little bit unexpressed or repressed within themselves. So as always, I think some like level of mindfulness and self-reflection is really helpful for the parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And like what you're speaking to there, in the context that I use it, is like inner child work, where we're reflecting on like how our children is making us, or reminding our systems or our psyche of our own experience as children. Do you incorporate in that in your work, or is that something that just like naturally occurs?
So I think if I had more space to really do that kind of therapy with the parent, that could be that. But I think that ends up being more like for the personal therapist of the parent. But I like sometimes I so want to explore that, because I can see like the kid gets handed to me as like, this kid has issues. And then like I see the dynamics, and I'm like, I want to help the parents too, because I can see their own trauma and generational issues and things that are really contributing to the kids' issues in a way that the parent doesn't intend or doesn't want, but because they haven't done that work on themselves. And it's easier for sometimes to maybe say, okay, my kid needs help, than to take that second step of I want to do work on myself as well.
Right. Yeah. And I think like a big source of either like resistance to that is usually from a place of potential like shame, or feeling like we may not be good parents, or be a good mother, or be a good father. And so to help to soothe that, and to maybe numb that in ways, casting that on the child, like if the child's therapist will fix this, the child's therapist will do this work with their issues, and then it'll be resolved. But I think an important thing to note with families and with parents is, even if you're not doing everything quote unquote right, or in the way that you feel like would be more beneficial for your child, it doesn't mean that you're a terrible parent, and it doesn't mean that you're not trying. Like sometimes the best thing that you can do for your child is to get help for yourself and get support for yourself. I know that you have done some workshops and some individual supports with the in like more of a spiritual realm as well, with clients. So you've worked like one-on-one with clients in that way.
Yeah, so this is kind of speaking to another part of my like identity as a therapist, which is that I'm a transpersonal therapist. So I was specifically trained with an extensive like focus on mindfulness, and also on incorporating spirit into the therapy room. And what I mean by that is like we have the focus on mind, we have the focus on body, emotions, and like I also recognize that there can be a spiritual component that's really important as a part of people's lives. And for me, that's not about religion. That's not about me as a therapist. I'm never pushing my personal values onto anyone. And I don't talk about what I believe or my personal stuff like that, but allowing that space for somebody to bring up their own spiritual or existential concerns and bring that into the therapy room, which sometimes maybe it feels like that's a taboo, or that's like not something that they're there in therapy to talk about. So really creating that and opening that up is like, this is a place where if you want to explore like spiritual stuff too, you can. And also then like the mindfulness kind of ties into that in an interesting, and it's kind of like separate, right? There's spirituality, and then there's mindfulness, is something that like a lot of therapists now are realizing is really important, but that was like part of my training as a transpersonal therapist.
Yeah, like bridging these connections between the mind, body, spirit, like having those different keys is an essential factor into coming into like what I think many describe as like wholeness of like feeling connected. I talk in Back to Heart about some of the experience in like the spiritual realm. Spirituality is very important to me. Spirit is very important to me. But everyone experiences that in a very different way. And that's not even in any religious context, just context of like connection with ourself, and with all that is in a way that feels good for us and helps us to feel grounded and rooted in our hearts and coming back into our hearts. Thank you for all of this. This has been like an amazing, amazing interview, an amazing conversation. I do want to give an opportunity for any local listeners, if they're interested in working with you, if they are having any challenges with their children or challenges within the family dynamic and the family home, and you think, or they think that art therapy might be beneficial for them or something that they'd like to explore, is there any way that they can get in contact with you or learn more about what you do?
Absolutely. So I operate out of an acupuncture clinic and holistic health clinic in Tarpon Springs, Florida. And it's called the White Crane Clinic. So if you go to whitecraneclinic.com, you'll see the whole team there, you'll see me, and you can reach out and get in touch. And again, I do work with children and families. I also work with teens and adults. So reach out if you're interested.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining this episode of Back to Heart. If this struck a chord in your own heart, any listeners out there, please feel free to leave a review or to message either me and Ambrosia on any of our social medias or our emails. I will leave all of that information in the description below. If you have any questions for us, the same thing applies. Please feel free to reach out and we will do the best that we can to answer any of your questions. If you would like to hear about anything or have any questions for future podcast episodes, let me know and I can create that for you. Otherwise, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming back to heart. Thank you, Ambrosia, for being here and for coming back to your own heart and for bringing more love and sharing that to other people's hearts. I will talk to you all soon.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.